Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Beatles Forever. In our last episode, we had Brian getting started on his autobiography after dragging his feet. He got Derek Taylor to ghostwrite his book, A Cellarful of Noise. He didn't do it for money. He wanted to be recognized for his great achievements in the 2 years of being a manager in the musical world. Brian had a falling out with Bill Harry when he bought the shares of the Mersey Beat, and he told Harry that he would have freedom in his editorials, but Brian started to be bossy, and Harry decided to leave. Lastly, Brian was sorry he didn't get to manage the group The Searchers, and they were sorry he wasn't their manager too. So let's see what Brian's up to today. The media was full of praise for Brian. They called him the man with the Midas touch, Mr. Beat, the king of Liverpool, and the fifth Beatle. Brian was too busy to let it go to his head. He didn't take time to see all he was doing. He had a huge appetite for expansion, and he enjoyed his management role. He believed he could do a fine job for whomever he represented, and this became a problem in his life. He was obsessed by signing new acts when he had too many acts to start with. Managing the Beatles could have been a full-time occupation. He had an addictive personality, and that was proving a handicap. Too many Merseysiders felt that Brian expanded far too quickly, and it was unthinkable that he should take on more acts. Brian wanted to nurture Liverpool's music. He next set his sights on Tom Quigley. He was a freckle-faced 17-year-old. Brian saw him when he opened a Beatles show at Queen's Hall, Winds. Quigley was in a group called the Challengers, and he sang breezily, and the girls in the audience liked him. Brian believed there was something to develop, and he spoke to Quigley but didn't promise him anything. Quigley told Bob Willard that he was anxiously awaiting an offer from Brian. A year later, when Epstein's business was more secure, he made the offer to Quigley. He offered him a salary, a new suit, a new hairstyle, and instructions to smarten his demeanor. Brian said Quigley's old suit looked like it came off the peg and was cheaply made, and he renamed him Tommy Quigley, and his backing group was dropped. Epstein had a good strategy. The promotional material talked about the freckle-faced boy who was kind to his dog Arthur, and he was going to be a star. This ended up being one of Brian's costliest failures in terms of time and effort, and more importantly, money. George Martin was busy, and Brian wanted to spread his wings with other record labels, so Brian asked Dick James to suggest the record label, and he introduced him to Ray Horrocks. Brian was impressed. Horrocks left Decca and switched to Pi Records, and he had produced all of Anthony Newley's string of hits there. Brian recalled that Newley had opened his Nims record shop back in Liverpool, and he admired the man and his work. To link up with this producer would be a coup. Horrocks had wanted a chance to produce Brian's artist if Brian had picked him, so Epstein was very involved with Quigley. He attended most of his recording sessions. He hand-wrote letters of thanks and encouragement to Horrocks, and he donated a song by Lennon and McCartney entitled Tip of My Tongue as his debut single. The singer had massive audience exposure. He went on 3 Beatle tours, 2 Billy J. Kramer tours, and a Gary and the Pacemaker tour, and a promotional tour of the United States costing $30,000. Within 18 months of his first record, Quigley released 5 new and lively singles, and they all flopped. So Brian was horrified and dumbfounded. This was the first time he had a commercial failure. Quigley's shows were popular, but his yardstick for real success was the record charts, which Quigley never entered. In Brian's office, Quigley's name became taboo, and those staff members who sympathized or asked questions were ignored. Brian's silence spoke volumes. Ray Horrocks said that Tommy had professionalism, but he knew his place with Brian. He was very hard-working, very self-confident. His act carried a touch of vaudeville, which the Beatles loved, and he used a bowler hat. Epstein thought that time would prove him right. Brian continued to praise him, but Quigley's career ended when he drank too much and became unreliable. He did the thing that Brian couldn't abide by. He arrived late at some shows. Brian moved to London on March the 9th, 1964. It was inevitable to Queenie, Harry, and Clive. They continued to run the thriving stores. Brian's commuting was too much of a strain. Before Brian moved, he had dinner with his family, and they started to talk about the family's surname. Some pronunciation verified between he preferred Epstein and the generally favored Epstein. Anyone that knew the family called them Epstein, and Harry asked Brian if he would consider changing his last name for business. It might make life easier for him when he was in London, but Brian wouldn't consider it. He had pride in his name. It sounded positively Jewish, and that would be an advantage in the world of show business. Brian at this time had 8 performers, and he wrote personally to them: the Beatles, Gary, Billy J. Kramer and the Dakotas, Cilla, The Foremost, Tommy Quickly, and a rugged instrumental group named Sounds Incorporated. Oh, and also the Remo 4. The letter let them know a few details about the move to London. The principal reason for the departure from Liverpool: he was anxious to make NIMS Enterprises the finest and most efficient management direction of artists in the world. He didn't want to be in Liverpool when he needed to be in London, and vice versa. He thought things would be improved by the centralization of their divisions in the heart of London and next to the London Palladium. He said that the new phone number was going to be RE Gent 3261. There are 10 lines, and the telephonists have been told that the artists he represented, their calls were the most important. For calls after hours, there would be a system called Answerphone. It was a service that would advise the artist which member of the staff was on duty and under what number they could be located. In a nutshell, NIMS Enterprises is open to you every hour of every day and night. And he handwrote his own personal number, and in parentheses, he wrote in the letter that it should be treated as strictly confidential, and he invited them to see the office if they hadn't already. Then Brian got a London home, a flat at 15 Wadden House, William Mews, a few hundred yards from Harrods. Brian's groups dominated the charts. The appearance fee of his top 3 acts, the Beatles, Billy J. Kramer, and Gary and the Pacemakers, rose to around £1,000 per night for each act. Brian's percentage increased from 10% to 25%, as the contract stated. The strain of juggling the Beatles' careers alongside his other acts gave Brian much worry. He still wanted to get more acts, and he knew he would not be able to give them equal time. After Gary had 2 singles, Brian called him in his office saying, "Truthfully, Gary, I cannot devote the same time to the Beatles and yourselves, because the Beatles have become the biggest property Britain has ever known, and you come second at this moment." A London management agency had offered to take Gary and the Pacemakers from Brian, increasing the singer's income overnight. It could have been an explosive moment with Gary Marsden, who had always had a keen rivalry with the Beatles, but Brian's forthrightness won his understanding. He recognized Brian's qualities, and he told him, "I don't want any other management. You've done what you've done for us with no problems. You'll just have to devote more time to the beats." And in parentheses, the author said, throughout his life, Gary Marsden has called them the Beats. Gary says, "Because they're so massive, I understand." Flattered and flustered with pride, Epstein then said that in the long run he would make Gary more money, but he would have to accept less attention. There were more groups that wanted to join Brian's Nimpire, as they called it. Even though he was unsuccessful with acts at times, he had an aura that few could resist. He had style and flair. Epstein refused to take on Marianne Faithfull. Marianne's mother had approached him, and he said he would not sign another girl as long as he managed Cilla Black. It didn't make sense because many of his groups were competitive. He and Cilla were inseparable, as he told his friends. He had a personal and professional relationship with her, and he glowed in her company and enjoyed her unsophisticated Liverpudlian presence. His devotion to Cilla lost him several potential girl stars. Brian thought that he would have to balance her with a male leading man, a solo singer like Tom Jones or Engelbert Humperdinck. And this is where Michael Haslam entered. He was 24 and a pub singer in Bolton, Lancashire, and seemed an odd candidate for Brian. He played guitar and sang robust ballads, and he was semi-professional because he worked by day in a tannery. Epstein went to see Haslam's show and recorded it with a pocket-sized recorder. Brian felt excitement about his discovery, just as he did with the Beatles, and Cilla and many more artists that he had given jobs. So Brian offered him a job, and Michael accepted and got his grooming. Brian got him 2 mohair suits. One was for stage work and the other for television. The singer's hair was styled by Brian's hairdresser, and he was told his guitar playing would have to stop. Haslam said it was difficult not having the guitar after 10 years, and he didn't know what to do with his hands. Brian looked at Haslam as a leading man opposite Cilla, and Haslam went along with it. It was difficult to cross Brian because he was such a nice man. Epstein had confidence in Haslam, but he didn't invest much into him. The singer said, "He gave me a choice, and he chose the £60 a week plus expenses." He had the help of George Martin as a producer, and leading orchestra leader Johnny Spence, but nothing happened. Epstein gave Haslam 300 demonstration songs to listen to, but Haslam, he was unimpressed. Brian gave him a song that he felt would be in the top 10. It was a single, Gotta Get a Hold of Myself. It sold well, but it failed to reach the charts, as did his prophetically titled There Goes the Forgotten Man. So Epstein was more disappointed than Haslam. After 2 years, it was shown that Haslam wasn't going to measure up as a recording artist, and when his option for contract renewal came up, Brian drew up an agreement ending their arrangement by mutual consent. Haslam signed it without bitterness. Looking back at his magical carpet ride, he said, "He never raised my hopes. He was a good thing in my life." I will end the video here. Brian got his London office, and then he tried to find more talent, even though he had his hands full with all the artists he had signed. Poor Gary was told that Brian couldn't give him much of his time, and said the Beatles were so popular he needed to give them his attention. And Gary said he understood, and he stayed with Brian even though he could have got in with another management agency and made more money. Then we find out about two acts that didn't get the Midas touch. It was Tom Quigley and Michael Haslam. Tom didn't work out because he wasn't reliable, and for some reason he didn't have a record success. And Michael was under contract for 2 years and nothing much happened, so he was let go with no animosity toward Brian. So this was an interesting video because we got to see how Brian got himself set up in London, and he let his artists know about the London location and how available he was to them, and gave him his personal number and letters. He felt as bad as the other artists when success he had with other artists did not work in their cases, and Brian showed he had a special bond with Scylla. It would not hire another female artist in loyalty to her. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, if you could give it a thumbs up, it would be greatly appreciated. As I've stated before, I created a list of merchandise from Amazon that I thought you might be interested in, and if you click on the link, it takes you to the Amazon page. If you purchase it, I get a small commission. That's of no extra cost to you. But more importantly, I wish everyone a great day, and tune in again soon for another episode of The Beatles Forever. Thank you.